Okay, so today what we'll be talking about is turbulent times budgeting during a crisis. So before we get started, I just wanted to give a little background of who I am. So who's Thalia and why personal finance? So I am a UConn graduate. I studied finance and gender studies during undergrad, and now I'm a master's candidate at Penn for organizational dynamics with the concentration of leadership coaching. And so I became a financial coach in 2018. And from the various people that I've coached in various fields, they have paid off over $90,000 in debt collectively and saved over $25,000. And so I love personal finance because a lot of my women role models growing up were in the financial industry, and it was just it was very interesting to me how they navigated a male-dominant space. I also have been a recipient of financial irresponsibility, and it caused a lot of pain, and it was all due to financial literacy. And so I really wanted to change that, and my target audience is minorities who truly do struggle with financial literacy. And I just combined my formal education with my passion. And so that's just a little bit about me. So what we're going to go over today in this next a little less than an hour is what to do with your finances during a crisis. We're going to go over some budgeting basics, and we'll have an example of creating a budget and some key things to remember, and then I can open up the floor for questions. So I meant to tell y'all this is pretty interactive. So do you keep a written monthly budget? You can just type yes or no in the chat. There's no judgment here. Oh, that's a good one. Saving 6 to 8 months. It can be an Excel spreadsheet. It can be a Google sheet. It can be literally written down. Okay, we got some no's, we got some yeses. So the guiding scripture that I use for keeping a written monthly budget is Habakkuk 2:2. And the Lord answered me, write the vision, make it plain on tablets so he may run who reads it. Okay, kind of maybe. So this is, so when I am doing a budget, I always think of that scripture, because some people get so up in the air and just into the weeds of budgeting, and it just needs to be plain and it needs to be understandable for you. So keep that scripture in mind. And so now we're going to move on what to do with your money in a crisis. And also let me know if I'm going too fast, because I do get super excited and I'm like running off. So there are 4 steps, and we're going to go into each one of these steps. So the first one is to take inventory of your finances. And sometimes this can be the toughest part for folks. And it is the most worthwhile step, I believe. So do you have consumer debt? Do you have student loans? Do you have investments? Do you have savings? These are important to know, how much cash you have on hand. Do you have CDs? These are important to know, because depending on what stage you are in, whether you're in the wealth accumulation stage or the wealth preservation stage, that will determine how you navigate and maneuver with your budget and with your finances. And so I also want to give you the scripture that that coincides with this step, and that is in Proverbs 27:23, which is, to be sure you know the condition of your flocks, give careful attention to your herds. And that's in the NIV version. So it's important to God that you really are good stewards and just stewarding what he has given you. And the first step is to just really take inventory. And so the second step is to prioritize bills and expenses. And so what I do, and what I have my clients do is, okay, so what are some fixed expenses that you have? What are some variable expenses that you have? And fixed meaning, what are the reoccurring expenses that happen every single month that you can't miss? And then variable means they come up every month, but they might be different amounts. And also they may not be every month, but they're periodic, like once a quarter or anything like that. And so the next step is to reduce spending where you can. And I am not talking about, okay, like, don't get a latte, don't get your pumpkin spice. That's not what I'm saying with reduce spending where you can. What I tell my clients to do to really get understanding of how to reduce spending is to take your bank statement from the last 3 months. Get some highlighters, get some markers, and really highlight whatever categories you have. Create your own categories and then total up what it is that you're spending. And that'll really give you a picture as to what you're spending on if you're trying to be more mindful of your spending. And also if you're trying to figure out what you can reduce, what's important, what's not. This is data that you can use to help you prioritize your bills and expenses. I know someone mentioned that they want to have self-care, but also be mindful of their expenses. How can we do that? Well, how much do you spend on self-care a month? What do you consider self-care? So these are the things to think about. And so the guidance scripture that I use for this is Proverbs 21:20, and the NLT version is, "The wise have wealth and luxury, but fools spend whatever they get." And we want to be wise, and and I'm not saying wise and not have fun, but we just want to be truly mindful of what it is that we're spending. And so there's some additional scriptures that I'll give at the end, but the last one is to relax and take it one day at a time. I'm not saying that you can make this change overnight. This is a lifestyle. This is something that requires practice, and it's something that you can definitely get done. And I just want to encourage everyone to have grace with themselves, because there's a lot of emotions that actually a lot of financial gurus don't talk about that is attached to our spending habits, that's attached to our saving habits, and just the way in which we approach money. And I want to be explicit and acknowledge that those emotions are there, and that I don't want you to ignore those, but to honor those. So, what is a budget? So a budget, some people say it's a no plan, some people say it's restrictive, but it's truly just a spending plan for your money based off of your income and your expenses. It's a spending plan. You are the planner. You set the limits. So I just want you to know that you're in control of this process. And why is budgeting important? So those goals that we talked about earlier, about wanting to buy a house, wanting to to become debt-free, wanting to continue their self-care activities, having a budget helps you move towards these goals that we talked about. And it gives you 100% control of your money. And this is my favorite point. It ensures that you don't spend money that you don't have. And that is very hard when there's credit cards that exist in the world and people are like, this is free money. And I'm like, it's not free money. It is borrowed money. And the last thing that what makes budgeting so important, that it gives you peace of mind. Truly, it truly does. And that's why you hear Dave Ramsey in the Financial Peace University. It truly does give you peace. So I've talked about what it is, what budgeting is, why it's important, and so the how. So there are actually quite a few different methods of budgeting, but the one that I work with my clients is zero-based budgeting. So with zero-based budgeting, this is a method where your income minus your expenses equal to zero. So you zero out your account every single month. And how we do this is we write down your income at the top, and then you make a list of your fixed and variable expenses, which a little bit later into the presentation, I will give you some examples of categories that you can use. You can go as in detail as you want in your line items or as broad as you want. It's truly your budget. And then you compare your income to your total expenses, and you notice whether or not you zeroed it out or you're running a surplus, or you're running a deficit. And the last thing the point that I want to make about zero-based budgeting and just your budget in general is that you track your spending throughout the month. This is not a set it and forget it. Your budget can't update itself. And this will truly help you get into the habit of tracking and being mindful of what it is that you're spending. And so before we quickly move on, I want to let you know that the two other methods that I want to mention for budgeting is there's an envelope method where like you take all your cash out and you divvy it up that way. Or there's the proportional method. So for those who don't want to do line items, you could do proportions of just 50% goes towards your needs, 30% goes towards your wants, and 20% goes towards your goals. So these are the examples of budget categories. So what I have highlighted in the dark purple, which is housing, utilities, food, and transportation. Those are the categories that I consider fixed expenses. These are the four walls that keep your house running and that keep you alive and safe, and these are important. So mortgage, your rent, internet, phone, food for groceries, and transportation, gas. So the variable expenses are the subscriptions. So if you love your Netflix, if you love your Blue Apron, for those who don't like to go grocery shopping, that is me. The subscription is very important to me. And even the Wall Street Journal, just various different things, your pets. I consider those variable expenses, but it depends on how you want to categorize it. It's your budget. So I'm actually going to pause here and we're going to do an example of a zero-based budget. Jane makes $2,000, all right? And she is preparing her October budget. All right, so she knows her rent is going to be due and it's $800. Her electricity is $25, God bless her. Her Wi-Fi is $90, her phone bill is $90, transportation is $60. She's not going anywhere really during the time of coronavirus. Groceries are $200. She has to keep her Netflix going. She's the Amazon person. And she has some student loans. So her student loans are $300 a month, and she has a little bit of a standing balance with her credit card. So she has $150 that she pays. So what we have here is we have her income, and we have the fixed expenses that are listed out with their amounts, and we have it totaled up here. All of these are totaled up here. Now you look to the left, the bottom left corner, you see the delta. So she has $276 left. And some people just leave that there and they're like, oh, I have extra money, or, you know, they're buying different things. But for those of us that want to be on a budget, we're going to enter our goal. So the goal I'm going to choose is, you know, saving for a house. And so what I encourage my clients to do is you have to have every dollar has to have a job. So you cannot have $276 just sitting in your account and we don't know where it's going. If you want a miscellaneous line item, fine. If you want a spending line item, fine, but it has to be listed out. But for the sake of this example, Jane is going to put $276 towards her house, and now her zero-based budget is now $0. So that's one example of someone whose budget perfectly works out. Most times I get things like this, where there's like where there's folks that are running a $74 deficit and they still want to save $150. And so I always ask, where's this $224 coming from? And then I get various stories of just how they're getting their different sources of income, but we want to run a balanced budget and not run a deficit at all. As I close this presentation, the key things I want you to remember is to prepare your budget at least 1 month before. And good news for you, it's September 28th, so you still have a few days before your October budget is due to yourself. If you can't get it done by October 1st, I encourage you to at least have it done prior to your first paycheck. So that is what I'm encouraging you. And I definitely want you to remember that your budget is a living document. There is no such thing as a perfect budget. It is forever evolving. And I know there's a lot of things on Pinterest and on Instagram that are like, I did a budget fail this month. My budget failed. There's no such thing as that. It is a living, breathing document, just like you are as a human. And the last thing I really want to encourage you is to give yourself grace. Like, just where God meets you, where you are at, wherever area that you're inviting him to, you have to meet yourself where you're at. If you have never written a budget before, or if this is like, you used to and you didn't, wherever you are in your journey, like, you have to give yourself grace, because this is a lifestyle change. And it's just so important. I remember when I made my very first budget, I was like paralyzed. I was like, but what if my categories aren't exactly right? Like, what if I'm not using it for self-care? Like, what if I'm like using it to like household items? And now I don't even worry about that at all. It's like, all right, I understand where this is going. And so I'm going to open it up for questions, but if you have any other like personal questions that you don't want to ask in front of the group, you can contact me at talia@fortunefinancellc.com, and I will make sure Shelly and Jeff will be able to share this contact information.
Talia, I have a question. So just from your experience working with, your clients, what are some of the common pitfalls or challenges that they have to, stay on track with their budget?
Yes, I think some of the common pitfalls that I have seen is the goal, not attaining the goal fast enough. So when you have the goal of, oh, like, I want to pay off this debt, and then there's unexpected expenses that happen, it can be very discouraging to folks. And then they're like, oh, well, because I have to deal with this, I can no longer go back on track. And I have to remind them that it's living, it's breathing, and you have to, leave room for that kind of stuff. So, but that's definitely a common pitfall. And I think another one is trying to fit someone else's budget strategy. That never works. Like, if you know that you do not use Excel, do not put your budget on Excel. If it's tough, like, you want to have lower barriers to entry for whatever process it is that you're using, because you just don't, it's already can be kind of cumbersome. And so people make it harder than it needs to be. And it's fun. Budgeting is fun. We have a budget party. Like, it is fun, I promise. But those are some common pitfalls. And I think the last one that also comes to mind, I'm thinking of one of my clients, is the swiping. Oh, I have this, and then they're not tracking it, and I'm like, wait a minute, where's that coming from? Like, you want to use your credit card for points, but it needs to translate in your budget. Like, we need to see it. I don't discourage folks from using credit cards, but it depends where you are and what your discipline is like. But yeah, those are common pitfalls.
So as you go through your month, do you take note of every single thing that you spend on, and then you just compare it against what you had allocated for that month?
Yes. So let me ask you a question, and feel free to not answer it, but do you get paid monthly, weekly, or bi-weekly?
Bi-weekly.
Bi-weekly. Okay. So this is how I would do it, right? So I would set up a monthly budget, and then I would take the two checks that you'll have for the month, and whatever it is, if you already know what it's going to be, if it doesn't change, you're not talking about overtime or anything like that. Depending on how the bill dates fall, the due dates, I would put my categories and divide it up and each check will be zero. Like, does that make sense? So I would allocate each check, but it will all equal what the monthly billing is like. So then with each check, there will be a column that says, that has like the actual, the budgeted allocation, and then the actual, and then there's another column, I've used Excel, that has the formula that subtracts the two to keep me in line. And so what I do is my tracking, it's not like, oh, I did this on this day, but it's like, oh, that total is $16 for gas. And so I put $$16 in the actual column, and then it will subtract, like my third column will subtract, and that's how I keep track that way. But it depends on how detailed you want to get into it. But I do track, definitely. And I use my budget, I put my budget on Google Docs because it's real time. And I can take it.
I don't know if you guys know of the Every Dollar app. It's free and you can download it on your phone. It makes what Talia is saying very doable, where you have a planned budget, and then every time you spend, just enter it, and it makes it so easy for you to enter, and it automatically computes for you how much you spent and how much of your planned budget is remaining. So that might be something you want to look into.
Look at. I put it in the chat. Thanks, Mabel.
Hey, Talia. Great presentation. So my question for you is, given that we're in a pandemic, and obviously some people are in, some financial, strains, or, people are trying to be mindful of how they're spending. You mentioned self-care. Do you have any thoughts on how to differentiate or eliminate some of the things that you used to do prior to COVID, to how to be mindful in this time of being a little bit more aware of your spending habits?
Yeah, that's a great question, Shelly. So I definitely would make a list of what it is that you used to do and how often you used to do it. And then try to see, like, my philosophy is the more information that you have, the more options that you can see, and you can make a fully informed decision. So it depends on whether or not your income is going to be steady, right? Or if it's going to remain steady, and that you can try to continue to live the lifestyle that you had, probably just scaled back less. But I definitely recommend just truly making just taking inventory and making a list of just the things that you've been doing, and if there's different things that you can try, and if you can find an alternative option, because we still have to take care of ourselves during this time, and you can't stay in the house staring at a wall during this time, but you also want to live a little, and if you have a list and you can find alternatives for the different things, that'll be helpful. But it also depends on if you have expensive hobbies, so it really, it's definitely, I think I'm having a hard time answering the question because I'm very customizable. I don't have a one size fits all approach for folks. I truly do get into the details of people's financial profiles. And so I think of one of my clients who loves clothes, right? And I mean styling and all those different things. And for her, that's her version of self-care, but she also wants to buy a house. And so how I talk about that, I'm like, okay, well, can we like eliminate, you know, like instead of buying like this many articles of clothing, like can we like scale it down, or can we go thrifting, or could we find a different hobby? You know, there's not really much we can do. You can't go anywhere. And so it really depends. You know, I have another friend who really enjoys skiing. All right, well, is it going to be possible to be doing skiing? You know, this is the time where, you know, the summertime, if you want discounted ski gear, this is the time that you would be getting it. Well, do you really need that? You know, or do we need to get the gear this year? Is there something else that we can do, you know, during that season for a different time? So I hope that answers your question. Just really just taking stock and making fully informed decisions.
And that was very helpful. Thank you.
Talia, I have a question.
Yes.
What if, for instance, you find, you know, as you're doing your budget, like you like for, let's say, people who it's their first time to do a budget, and then realize that they have more items for expenses than there is money or income. What do you suggest for them to do if it's their first time, and this is the situation where you have more items of expenditures than you have cash?
Yeah, I actually have an example of that. So, and it's my mom, so it's okay if she can if I use her as an example. So she wanted to buy a home, and I was like, cool, that's exciting. So let's run some numbers. And she's like, no, I don't want to. I'm like, yeah, no, I really want to run these numbers with you. And so I pulled up her monthly budget. I said, okay, so give me a list of your bills, right? She gives me a list. And I'm like, wow, so you have about $1,500 going out, right? And you don't have enough coming in. These are just like made up numbers. And so I'm like, so what are we gonna do? And so I'm looking, right? And I'm like, so what are your four walls, right? So you have your groceries, you have your rent, you have your transportation. Okay, transportation's a little high. Like, can you see if your job has like a program where they can reimburse or they can, you know, subsidize? I know Penn does a subsidy program if you use SEPTA, like, you know, what are those different things? Hulu, Netflix. I mean, my mom had Hulu, Netflix, Amazon Prime, like all these different subscriptions. I'm like, you can only watch one at a time. Like, how often are you watching them, you know? I said, she's like, oh, well, I guess I can get rid of this. Do you have Amazon Prime? Yes, I have Amazon Prime. So will you order stuff for me? Yes, I'll order stuff for you so you can get the 2-day shipping. And just really had her slice and dice the extras. And I'm not saying that it has to be a bare bones budget, but I mean, she had Apple Music, and she never used Apple Music. Like, she had no idea that it was charging her. So these are, so that when I say, like, when you take stock and you see like what that list is, and you're running a deficit that you are spending, more is going out of your pocket than going in, that definitely helps you like eliminate, you know, to trim the fat, so to speak.
How many months savings of expenses do you recommend people have?
Yeah, so it depends on your family unit, right? So I recommend 6 to 8. And especially like during this pandemic has definitely changed my perspective. And so I was thinking a year, and that might sound a little extreme, but some industries have been totally obliterated. And with no, you know, a lot of folks are in transition. And so how I come up with that number is, you know, whatever your bare bones budget, and then if you want to add in transportation and some leisure, which I think is very important as well, you know, and multiply that out. And then, you know, make that your savings goal and make that separate from your emergency fund. Like, let those be two separate accounts, and you can have them in a high yielding interest savings account, but they're not really that high. They're like 0.6, which is very frustrating because they were like over 2% last year, but it's fine. So yeah, I definitely recommend 6 months to a year, just because sometimes it takes a long time to get a job, or you just don't know when things are going to happen. So.
Talia, when you say emergency funds, could you elaborate
Yeah.
distinguish emergency funds from savings?
Yes. So emergency fund are the unexpected, unplanned, like expenses. I mean, like the roof, is like falling, or like, you have to have like emergency dental work, like these are the things. And it doesn't have to be really, really big. It can be car things. Like, I don't have a car anymore, so just like car emergencies, that's different from savings. So the 6 to months, life savings is totally different. That is something, those are for planned expenses. Like, so some things that I have my clients plan for is, if you know you have a car and car tax season or registration is coming up, save for that. It could be $50, put a $50 line item, or $25, and just have it there. If you know you're an avid traveler, just set up a savings account and just have the $25 draw out of your account from the beginning. Those are planned expenses, and you don't get to draw from your emergency fund because like you forgot to like put in your line item that someone's birthday was coming up. The birthday or Christmas is not an emergency. It's on the same day of every year. Really plan it out. And one thing that I encourage my clients to do, and even couples, is like, at the year end, at December, look at your year ahead. What does that look like? You don't have to have your whole entire social calendar planned out, but if you know there are major events or things that you do yearly, have that scheduled, and then work backwards for your January budget, your February, March, and moving forward. I do my budget a year in advance, and these are all preliminary numbers, and then from the month, I'm not like starting from scratch. So I just compare, and I'm like, okay, I want to do that. You don't have to be that extreme, but it's important to distinguish emergency fund from your savings.
How much emergency fund would you recommend?
Definitely more than $1,000. I know if it's so I say $1,000 to beginner. Like, if you are not a saver and you're learning to save, $1,000 is a great start. But I say you calculate that number for yourself. What do your emergencies typically look like? Do you have a pet? Do you have children? Like, are they in school? Like, these are some big ticket items that you have to, I think those numbers need to be incorporated into that emergency number fund. Like, don't say like $1,000 and then the school bill comes back and the fee bill's like $3,000. It's like, so where does the other $2,000 come from? So I think it's a personal decision, but I always tell my clients 5,000 or more. Like, 5,000 for me is a minimum. You could truly sleep, rest easy. Because even if you have an emergency that, God forbid, it's like 5,500, at least you're putting 500 on a credit card, or asking a friend, or whatever it is, whatever the situation that you're in, it's at 500 instead of asking for 45, because you only have 1,000. So, do I have any tips for making budgeting fun? Yes. It sounds so cheesy. Get your favorite pen. If you have a pen, get your favorite notebook. Like, you gotta get some music. And if you want to do it with your friends, if you have that kind of circle where you can do that, have a budget party. I mean, truly, like, what are you planning on doing this month? Are you planning, okay, like, are we going out to eat? Okay, so should we put $50 here for our budget? Like, truly, like, making things like fun, just make it exciting. Like, for me, I had a new notebook. I mean, I made it a whole ordeal. I went to Michael's and got like a nice notebook. It was pink, and I was like, okay, I need to have dot grid. Like I made a whole event out of it, and I had a special pen for it, and that was something that I kept with me. You know, that was something when I was physically writing my budget, and I knew like this was the time. You know, and I had a separate date for it. I was like, this is my set date when I do my budget. And then I let people know, and then I'm looking at the masterpiece. I'm doing like multiple. So there are multiple ways to do it, but I think having a calm environment and making, you know, just realizing that you're doing it for yourself and it's good for you, is the fun tips that I have.
I was just thinking about, like, for me, for us, actually, like the visual part. So what I did is just like, I do have like little things like for my emergency funds, like how much is it filled. I have like that for a house, how much like you know, it goes and what is filled for the house, and also like little things, like little achievements or things that you want. Okay, this is specific for this. So you go by line, you divide, I mean, a month or weekly, because it makes fun and in a sense of like feel accomplished. You know, like color.
I'll give you my picture so you can post it there. I'll give you my picture so you can add me there.
It's the June fun.
Like you said, like I make fun. We have our little thing, and I like to put like colors, and I like paper. I do not like Excel files, so we do always with.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yes, definitely having those coloring pages they're fun. I see a lot of people that color. I personally don't, but they are really fun. That's awesome. I like to see the numbers go down. So I have like numbers, and I'm like, that looks good. That looks good. And I also have an Instagram account, so that's really cool. That makes it fun.
I have seen people like doing not just for investments, but even like to pay off that. Like it helps you to feel accomplished, and you know you want to go quick. So that's kind of encouraging. Yeah, like every amount you paint a line, or you paint a spot or a square or something until you get the big picture, which is really cool.